She took food from the mess hall every day until the sergeant caught her and took severe action. Private Jessica Miller trembled as she clutched the bread and cans against her chest, trying to hide the food under her camouflaged uniform when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching the supply depot at the Fort Garrison military base. For 3 months, she had repeated the same routine after dinner, always careful not to raise suspicions, but on that rainy March night, something had gone wrong. Sergeant Richard Thompson appeared in the depot doorway like a menacing shadow, his steely eyes fixed on the food she was trying to hide. For weeks, he had suspected someone was stealing supplies from the mess hall, and he had finally caught the culprit. The rain pounded loudly on the tin roof, drowning out the sound of Jessica's racing heart. "Private Miller, care to explain what you're doing here at this hour?" The sergeant's voice cut through the air like a blade. Jessica swallowed hard, knowing she'd been caught red-handed. At 22, she had joined the US Army as a chance to change her life, leaving behind the poverty of a slum in Detroit. She never imagined she'd end up in a situation like this. "Sergeant, I can explain." "Explain?" Richard interrupted, stepping forward. 3 months, Private. 3 months I've noticed food missing from the inventory. Always after you've cleaned the kitchen. Sergeant Thompson was known throughout the base for his strict discipline and unwavering standards. At 45, he had served in peacekeeping missions and was respected by all the soldiers. His reputation for never overlooking a breach of protocol preceded him, and Jessica knew she was in serious trouble. "Come with me to my office, now." His tone left no room for argument. The walk to the sergeant's office felt endless. Jessica's legs shook as she carried the food she'd tried to hide. The base was nearly empty at that hour, with only a few on-duty soldiers moving through the fluorescent-lit hallways that buzzed faintly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. Richard opened his office door and flicked on the light, revealing a stark room with a metal desk, a few chairs, and military diplomas hanging on the wall. The stale scent of old coffee lingered in the air. He sat behind the desk and motioned for Jessica to take the chair across from him. "Put the food on the table." He crossed his arms. Jessica obeyed silently, placing the 3 loaves of bread and 2 cans of sardines on the cold metal surface. Her hands trembled visibly, and she kept her eyes down, unable to meet the sergeant's gaze. "Look at me, Private." Richard's voice was firm. When Jessica finally raised her eyes, she saw something unexpected. Beyond his usual authority and seriousness, there was genuine curiosity in the sergeant's expression. He didn't just seem angry, he was intrigued. "First, I need to know one thing. This isn't about hunger, is it? You get 3 meals a day here on base just like the rest of us. So tell me, where is this food going?" The direct question made Jessica even more nervous. She had rehearsed excuses in her head in case she was caught, but now, under the sergeant's piercing stare, they all fell apart. Sergeant, it's complicated." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've got all night, Private, and I've got patience for complicated explanations." Jessica took a deep breath, knowing there was no escaping the truth. For all those months, she had kept her secret so carefully, but now she needed to reveal something that could change everything. "There's a family, Sergeant. A family that needs help." "What family?" Richard leaned forward, his expression intensifying. "Mrs. Diane's family. She lives in a small house near the south gate of the base with her 3 young children. Her husband disappeared a few months ago. She's sick and can't work properly." The sergeant remained silent for a few seconds, processing the information. Jessica continued, feeling she had to explain everything before he interrupted her. "I met them 3 months ago when I was on perimeter patrol. The boys were too thin, Sergeant. Diane was trying to sell old clothes on the street to buy food, but no one bought anything. When I saw the situation..." "You decided to steal from the military base to feed strangers," Richard finished, his voice heavy with disapproval. "It's not stealing, Sergeant," Jessica protested, raising her voice for the first time. "I only take what's left after dinner, food that would have gone to waste anyway." "Private Miller, leftovers don't go to waste. They have a designated purpose under military regulations. And you know that." Jessica lowered her head again, knowing he was right. She had broken serious military protocols, no matter her intentions. The silence stretched for long minutes, only the sound of rain outside filling the space between them. "Show me," Richard said suddenly. "What do you mean, Sergeant?" "I want to meet this family now." "But Sergeant, it's late at night and it's raining." "Private Miller, I'm not asking. I'm ordering. You're taking me to that family tonight." The determination in the sergeant's voice left no room for argument. Jessica felt a shiver run down her spine. Taking him to Mrs. Diane's house meant exposing the family to potential trouble with military authorities, but she had no choice. 15 minutes later, the two left the base in a military jeep, cutting through the rainy night along the dirt roads leading to the family's neighborhood. Jessica drove in silence, occasionally giving directions while Richard watched the landscape through the window. The Pinewood neighborhood was a simple community on the outskirts of Fort Garrison, with small brick houses and some still made of wood. The streets weren't paved, and the rain had turned many of them into small rivers of mud. When they stopped in front of a light blue house with a rusty iron gate, Jessica's stomach churned. "This is it," she said, turning off the engine. "Let's go." Richard opened the door and stepped out, seemingly oblivious to the rain soaking his uniform. Jessica knocked on the gate 3 times, a code she'd worked out with the family. A light turned on inside, and after a few minutes, the door opened, revealing a thin woman in her mid-30s, with brown skin and hair tied in a messy bun. "Jessica," Mrs. Diane smiled, but her expression changed when she saw the sergeant beside the private. "Good evening. Is something wrong?" "Good evening, Mrs. Diane. This is Sergeant Thompson. He wanted to meet you and the children." The woman hesitantly opened the gate, clearly confused by the situation. Richard stepped into the small yard, carefully observing everything around him. The house had only 3 small rooms, and even at night, it was clear the family lived with very little. "Come in, please. Sorry for the mess." Diane led them inside. The living room was simple, with an old 2-seater sofa, a small table, and an old television. On the walls were a few family photos and a wooden crucifix. 3 children appeared from the kitchen, 2 boys around 6 and 8 years old, and a girl about 4. "Aunt Jessica," the girl ran toward the soldier, who picked her up with obvious affection. "Hi, Emily, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm good. Mommy made soup today, but there wasn't any bread," the child replied with the innocence typical of her age. Richard watched the interaction in silence, noticing how the children addressed Jessica with familiarity and warmth. The boys, Michael and David, also approached, greeting the soldier with tight hugs. "Aunt Jessica, did you bring food today?" asked Michael, the older one. Jessica looked at Richard with a pained expression, unsure how to respond. It was Mrs. Diane who broke the silence, addressing the sergeant. "Sir, Jessica has been an angel to us. Ever since my husband left, it's been so hard to provide for the children. I work when I can, doing laundry or cleaning, but with arthritis in my hands, it's getting harder." "Your husband left?" Richard asked, for the first time sounding less formal. He said he was going to look for work in Chicago and would send money. That was 4 months ago. I haven't heard from him since." The woman spoke with a sadness that revealed years of struggle and disappointment. Richard kept observing the house, noticing details that told the story of a family trying to survive with dignity despite their hardships. "Mommy, who's the man?" "Who's the?" David asked, eyeing Richard with childlike curiosity. "I'm Aunt Jessica's co-worker," Richard replied, surprising everyone with his softer tone. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Mrs. Diane explaining her situation and the children asking innocent questions. When they finally left the house, Richard was completely silent, lost in thought. On the way back to the base, Jessica tried to read the sergeant's expression, but his face remained impassive as he stared out the window. The rain had eased, but still tapped rhythmically on the jeep's roof. "Sergeant," Jessica finally broke the silence. "I know I broke regulations, but—" "Private Miller," Richard interrupted. "When we get back to base, I want you to sign a formal confession about the food diversion." Jessica's heart sank. A formal confession meant a court-martial, possible discharge from the army, and the end of her dreams for a better life. "Sergeant, please. And I want you to stop this activity completely, understood?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice choked. The rest of the ride passed in absolute silence. Back at the base, Richard dismissed her after she signed the document confessing her actions. Jessica returned to her barracks with a heavy heart, knowing she had lost not just her military career, but also the only way she could help Mrs. Diane's family. The following days were the hardest Jessica had faced since joining the army. The disciplinary process had begun, and she knew it was only a matter of time before she was discharged. Worse was the guilt she felt whenever she thought of Mrs. Diane's children, especially little Emily, asking why Aunt Jessica hadn't come back. For a week, she carried out her duties at the base, but could feel the curious stares of the other soldiers. Richard hadn't publicly disclosed the reason for the investigation, but rumors were starting to spread. It was on a Thursday afternoon, while organizing supplies in the storeroom, that Corporal Wilson approached her with a concerned look. "Jessica, have you seen Sergeant Thompson today?" "No, why?" "He was in the Pinewood neighborhood last night. My brother-in-law lives there and said he saw him carrying bags of food." Jessica stopped what she was doing, processing the information. "Why would Richard be in the neighborhood where Mrs. Diane lived?" "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. My brother-in-law knows a military uniform when he sees one. He said it was definitely a sergeant, and here at the base, Thompson is the only one with that rank." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. Jessica spent the rest of the day thinking about the information. Had Richard decided to help the family? Or was he investigating further to make sure she was properly punished? The uncertainty was eating at her. On Friday morning during physical training, she decided to confront him directly. She waited until the session ended and approached him as the other soldiers dispersed. "Sergeant, may I speak with you privately?" Richard looked at her with a neutral expression. "2 minutes, Private. I heard you were in the Pinewood neighborhood yesterday." The sergeant's expression hardened immediately. "And where did you hear that? Does it matter? Did you go to see Mrs. Diane's family?" "Private Miller, your disciplinary issues are enough without you questioning my movements off base." "Sergeant, I just wanted to know—" "You don't need to know anything." Richard raised his voice, drawing attention from passing soldiers. "Focus on your own responsibilities and prepare for the consequences of your actions." Jessica walked away, feeling even more confused. His defensive tone only confirmed he'd been in the neighborhood, but his motives remained a mystery. Over the weekend, unable to bear the anxiety, Jessica decided to visit Mrs. Diane on her own. She left the base during her time off and took a bus to the Pinewood neighborhood, her heart heavy with worry about how she'd find the family. When she arrived at the Blue House, she was greeted with the usual warm hugs from the children, but Mrs. Diane seemed different. There was a renewed energy in her eyes, and the house was noticeably tidier. "Jessica, it's so good to see you." Diane hugged her. "We've missed you. How are you all? Is everything okay?" "Yes, thank God. And there's something interesting to tell you." Jessica's stomach twisted. "What happened?" "That sergeant you brought here showed up yesterday, alone. He brought several bags of groceries and said he'd help us for a while." "He said that?" Jessica could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Yes. But it was a little strange, Jessica. He seemed kind of nervous, you know. Kept saying it was just temporary help and that we couldn't tell anyone." The children gathered around, excited to talk about Aunt Jessica's friend. Michael, the oldest, was the most detailed. "Aunt Jessica, the man brought milk, bread, rice, beans, and even some candy for us. But he seemed serious the whole time. And he asked about you," Emily added. "Wanted to know if you were okay." Jessica spent another hour at the house, playing with the kids and talking with Mrs. Diane about the unusual situation. When she left, her mind was buzzing with questions about the sergeant's true motives. On Monday, Richard summoned her to his office again. This time, however, there were more documents on his desk, and his expression was even grimmer than usual. "Private Miller, sit down." Jessica obeyed, bracing for the worst. "I've received the preliminary report on the food theft investigation. It seems your problems are bigger than I thought." "What do you mean, Sergeant?" Richard picked up a folder and opened it. revealing photos and documents. This past week, food kept disappearing from the mess hall, even after you signed the confession and promised to stop. Jessica felt her blood run cold. But I stopped, Sergeant. I haven't taken anything since that night. The evidence suggests otherwise. He showed her a photo clearly depicting food cans near her quarters. This was found yesterday, Private. Sergeant, that's not mine. Someone planted those things there. And why would anyone do that? Jessica couldn't answer. Staring at the photos, she realized she was being framed in a way she couldn't comprehend. Someone wanted her to look guilty for something she hadn't done. Sergeant, I swear on my family I haven't taken anything else. You have to believe me. Richard studied her for long seconds, as if trying to read her soul through her eyes. Private, a court-martial process has officially begun. You'll be tried not just for the original theft, but also for disobeying direct orders and continuing illegal activities. But I didn't do any of that. The preliminary hearing is next Friday. Until then, you're suspended from all operational duties and restricted to your quarters except for meals and basic needs. Jessica left the office devastated. Her military career was effectively over, and worse, she was being accused of things she hadn't done. Someone on base was sabotaging her, but she had no idea who or why. Over the next few days, she mostly stayed isolated, only leaving for mandatory meals. It was during one of these meals that she noticed something odd. Corporal Williams, in charge of the kitchen, was watching her with an intensity that made her uneasy. Williams was a man in his 40s who had worked on base for over 15 years. He was known for being efficient, but also grumpy and resistant to routine changes. Jessica had never interacted much with him, but now she realized he was constantly observing her. On Wednesday, 2 days before the hearing, she was walking to the mess hall when she heard voices from the kitchen. Recognizing Williams's voice, she hid behind a pillar to listen. "You gotta stop this, Corporal. Things are getting out of hand," said another soldier she couldn't identify. "Relax, man. The kid's gonna take the fall and that's it. No one's gonna suspect we've been selling food off base." Jessica felt the ground vanish beneath her. Williams was selling base supplies and using her as a scapegoat. But what if she talks? Talks about what? She already admitted to taking food. With the evidence I planted, no one's gonna believe her anyway. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Williams explaining how he'd fabricated evidence against Jessica to cover his own scheme. She memorized every detail, knowing she needed concrete proof. That night, she violated her quarters restriction and went to find Richard. She found him in his office, working late as usual. "Private Miller, you're supposed to be in your quarters." "Sergeant, I found out who's really stealing food from the base." Richard stopped what he was doing and looked at her carefully. "Explain." Jessica recounted everything she'd heard, every detail of the conversation between Williams and his accomplice. She watched the sergeant's expression shift from skepticism to genuine interest. "Do you have proof of what you're saying?" "I don't have a recording, but I know where they hide the food before selling it, and I know they're planning another sale tomorrow night." Richard was silent for several minutes, clearly processing the information. Finally, he stood and paced his office. "If you're lying to save your own skin..." "Sergeant, I'll accept any punishment if I'm not telling the truth. But you need to investigate this. Where do they hide the food?" "In the secondary storage behind the cleaning supplies. Williams has access because he helps organize the supplies." Richard dismissed her without giving further details about what he would do with the information. Jessica spent a sleepless night, hoping he would take her accusations seriously. On Thursday morning, she was surprised by an urgent summons to the office of the base commander, Colonel William Johnson. When she arrived, she found not only the colonel but also Richard, and to her shock, Williams. "Private Miller," the colonel began in a grave voice, "very serious accusations were made last night. Sergeant Thompson informed me of your allegations against Corporal Williams." Jessica looked at Williams, who glared at her with barely concealed hatred. "Yes, Colonel. Corporal Williams categorically denies any involvement in food diversion. He claims you're trying to shift the blame to escape your own punishment." "Colonel, I know it seems too convenient, but..." "Quiet, Private," Williams interrupted. "Colonel, this girl is desperate. She knows she's about to be discharged and is making up stories to save herself. Richard, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Colonel, I requested an inspection of the secondary storage this morning. We found several hidden food items exactly where Private Miller said they would be." William's expression changed instantly. That proves nothing. Anyone could have put those things there." "Including you, Corporal?" Richard asked with a sharpness Jessica had never heard before. "Sergeant Thompson," the Colonel interjected, "what exactly is the evidence we found?" "Besides the hidden food, we also found a list with names and quantities, apparently of buyers, and Corporal Williams was seen leaving the base last night with 2 large bags, even though he wasn't on duty." Williams began sweating visibly. "Colonel, this is a conspiracy against me. They're working together to frame me." Then, something no one expected happened. The office door opened and another soldier entered, clearly nervous. "Excuse me, Colonel. I'm Private Baker. I need to talk about Corporal Williams." All eyes turned to the newcomer, who seemed to be struggling to find the courage to speak. "Private Baker, what do you have to say?" the Colonel asked. "Colonel, I've been helping Corporal Williams for a few months. He told me it was all legal, that we had permission to sell the surplus to needy families." Williams turned completely pale. "Baker, you don't know what you're saying." "I do, Corporal." Baker raised his voice, clearly determined to tell everything. "When I found out Private Miller was being blamed for something we did, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. What followed was a full confession of how Williams had set up a scheme to sell military food supplies to local merchants, using Baker as an accomplice, and then framing Jessica when he suspected someone was investigating the thefts. Williams denied everything to the end, but the evidence was overwhelming. Not only were there the physical proofs found in storage, but also Baker's testimony and the list of buyers that matched exactly the sales reports the private had made. "Corporal Williams," the Colonel said coldly, "you are under arrest and will face a court-martial for diversion of military supplies, falsifying evidence and attempting to frame an innocent subordinate." When Williams was led away by 2 security soldiers, the office fell silent for several minutes. Jessica could hardly believe her situation had changed so drastically. "Private Miller," the Colonel addressed her, "your original accusations about the food diversion remain valid. You broke military regulations, regardless of your reasons." Jessica's heart sank again. Even though she had helped uncover the real corruption at the base, she would still be punished for her own actions. "However," the Colonel continued, "given the special circumstances and the fact that you were partially a victim of a conspiracy, the punishment will be significantly reduced. You will receive a formal reprimand and be suspended for 2 weeks, without pay." Jessica could hardly believe the leniency of the punishment. She had expected expulsion and a court-martial, and now she was only getting a temporary suspension. "Colonel, thank you so much for your fairness." "Don't thank me yet, soldier. There's an additional condition." Richard, who had been silently observing the whole scene, finally smiled for the first time since Jessica had known him. "The condition is that you work with me during your suspension on a special project," the Colonel explained. "Sergeant Thompson has proposed an interesting idea for properly handling the base's surplus food." Jessica looked at Richard with surprise and gratitude. He had not only believed in her when she needed it most, but was also offering a solution to the problem that had caused the whole situation. "What kind of project, Colonel?" "An official program to distribute surplus food to needy families in the area, supervised by Sergeant Thompson, with you as the field coordinator." Emotion overwhelmed Jessica. Not only had she been spared severe punishment, but now she would have the chance to legally help the families who needed it so much. "I accept with honor, Colonel." "Good. The program starts next Monday. Sergeant Thompson, I expect a detailed report on the implementation by the end of the week." When they left the Colonel's office, Jessica finally had a chance to speak privately with Richard. "Sergeant, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my career." "You saved your own career, soldier. You had the courage to tell the truth even when it seemed like it would only hurt you more." They walked in silence for a few moments before Jessica asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the previous week. "Sergeant, may I ask why you decided to help Mrs. Diane's family?" Richard stopped walking and looked at her with an expression that mixed vulnerability and determination. "Because a long time ago I was in the same situation as those children." "What do you mean?" My father left my family when I was 8. My mother was left alone with 4 kids, trying to survive on odd jobs. If it hadn't been for the generosity of strangers who helped us in critical moments, I don't know if we would have made it. Jessica had never imagined that the stern, disciplined sergeant had faced hardships like those of the family she had been helping. Is that why you visited Mrs. Diane? After I learned about their situation, I couldn't sleep properly for 3 nights. I kept thinking about those hungry children. When you stopped showing up there, they asked about you. I saw the sadness in their eyes. You could have told me this from the beginning. Soldier, I'm a sergeant in the U.S. Army. I have responsibilities and protocols to follow. I can't just ignore regulation violations, even when I understand the reasons. But you found a way to help within the protocols. Exactly. And that's an important lesson for you. There's always a right way to do the right thing. You just need patience and creativity to find it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us tremendously as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, Jessica and Richard worked together to develop the details of the food distribution program. They visited several struggling families in the area, cataloging their needs and establishing fair criteria for distribution. Mrs. Diane was one of the first to be officially registered in the program. When Richard explained that she would now receive regular lawful assistance, the woman cried tears of joy and gratitude. "Sergeant, you have no idea what this means for us," she said, holding his hands between hers. "To have this security, knowing the children won't go hungry." "Life will still be hard, Mrs. Diane," Richard replied honestly. "This program helps, but it doesn't solve all the problems. You'll still need to find ways to improve your situation on your own." "I know, Sergeant, but now I have hope again, and that's more than I had a week ago." The program was officially launched 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the military base. Colonel Johnson made sure to emphasize that the initiative had come from the dedication and creativity of his subordinates in finding solutions to the region's social issues. Jessica was appointed as the program's permanent coordinator, a role she embraced with enthusiasm and responsibility. Working directly with Richard gave her a new perspective on leadership, how it was possible to be both firm and compassionate at the same time. 6 months after the program began, life had changed dramatically for many families in the area. Mrs. Diane had secured a steady job at a sewing factory and was saving up to move to a larger home. The children were healthier and attending school regularly. "Aunt Jessica," Emily said during one of Jessica's routine visits, "when I grow up, I want to be a soldier like you and Uncle Richard." "Why, sweetheart? Because you help people, and that's important, right?" Jessica smiled, remembering how her journey had begun, breaking rules out of desperation, and how she'd reached a point where she could help while following the right protocols. At the end of that year, during the annual performance review, Richard was promoted to Master Sergeant, recognition not only for his leadership at the base, but also for the success of the social program he'd envisioned. Jessica was also promoted from private to corporal in a ceremony where the colonel himself highlighted her transformation from a rebellious young woman into a respected community leader. "Corporal Miller," Richard said to her after the ceremony, "you've learned one of the most important lessons of military life. True strength isn't about breaking rules, but using the system to do good." "I learned that from the best teacher, Master Sergeant. And you taught this old sergeant that sometimes you have to look beyond regulations to understand what truly matters." The food distribution program became a model for other military bases across the country. Delegations from different regions came to Fort Garrison to learn how to implement similar initiatives in their own communities. 2 years later, during a routine visit to Mrs. Diane's family, Jessica came across a scene that moved her deeply. Michael, now 10 years old, was helping other boys in the Pinewood neighborhood with their homework, using books he'd received through one of the military program's extensions. "Michael, have you become a teacher?" she teased the boy. "Oh, Aunt Jessica, I'm teaching them just like you taught me. Mom says when we learn something good, we have to share it with others." This simple philosophy from a child perfectly summarized what Jessica had learned throughout that transformative journey. What had begun as an act of rebellion had turned into a network of solidarity benefiting dozens of families. Richard, now recognized as one of the most respected sergeants in the region, never lost his disciplinary firmness, but had developed a reputation for being fair and understanding with soldiers facing personal struggles. "Master Sergeant," Jessica said to him during one of the program's weekly meetings, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had just kicked me out that first night." "I wonder that too, Corporal. But I believe when we do the right thing, even if it's hard at the time, the outcome is always better for everyone involved." "Do you think I did the right thing by taking that food in the beginning?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "You did what you thought was necessary with the information and resources you had. I can't judge your intentions, they were pure, but I can teach you that there's always a better way to solve problems." "And what if there wasn't? What if the system didn't allow helping those families? Then our responsibility would be to work toward changing the system, not ignoring it. Real, lasting change comes from within, Corporal. It comes from people like you who care enough to find creative solutions within the rules." This conversation became a defining moment in Jessica's personal philosophy. She realized her passion for helping others didn't have to conflict with her military career. It could actually strengthen it. 3 years after the program began, it had expanded to include not just food distribution, but also adult literacy classes, vocational training, and even a small mobile health clinic that visited underserved communities monthly. Jessica had become a bridge between the military base and the civilian community, a role she never imagined when she joined the US Army. Her work was respected by both her superiors and the families she helped. During one of the program's annual review meetings, Colonel Johnson made a remark that perfectly captured its impact. "What started as a disciplinary issue has become an example of how the armed forces can be a positive force in society. You've proven it's possible to maintain military discipline while showing human compassion." The program had also changed the community's perception of the military. Once viewed with suspicion by some residents, the soldiers from the base were now welcomed with respect and gratitude in local neighborhoods. "Corporal Miller," Mrs. Diane said during one of Jessica's last visits before her transfer to another base, "you didn't just save my family, you saved our whole community. The children here grew up seeing that there are good people in the world, people who care. Mrs. Diane, you taught me just as much. You taught me that sometimes the greatest courage is accepting help when we need it, and the greatest generosity is paying it forward when we can." Jessica's transfer to a base in Washington, D.C. was a significant promotion. She had been chosen to lead the national implementation of similar social programs, a responsibility she accepted with pride and determination. At her farewell gathering, Richard gave a speech that moved everyone present. "Corporal Miller arrived here as a young rebel breaking rules for a just cause. She leaves as a leader, transforming systems to serve just causes. That's the difference between revolution and evolution. She chose to evolve, and in doing so, helped all of us evolve too." After the ceremony, during a final walk around the base, Jessica and Richard reflected on everything that had happened. "Master Sergeant, do you think things would have been different if I hadn't been caught that night? I'm certain they would. You'd still be helping that family, but always afraid of being discovered. You'd never have had the chance to expand that help to other families in a legal and sustainable way, and you'd never have created the program." "Exactly. Sometimes we're forced to confront our own biases and limitations through the actions of others. You made me face the fact that rigidity without compassion isn't true leadership. You taught me that compassion without discipline isn't true help. And together, we learned it's possible to be firm and kind at the same time, disciplined and understanding, a soldier and a human being." On her last day at the base, Jessica paid a final visit to Mrs. Diane's family. The house had been renovated, the children were grown and healthy, and Mrs. Diane had become a respected community leader, helping other families benefit from the military programs. "Aunt Jessica," said Emily, now 7 years old, "are you going to miss us?" "I'll miss you very much, sweetheart, but I'll carry you all in my heart always. And I'll keep helping other families in other places, just like I helped you. When I grow up, I'm going to help families too. I'm sure you will, Emily, and you'll be very good at it." The legacy of the Fort Garrison program spread far beyond the borders of the small Missouri town. Jessica took with her not just the technical know-how of implementing military social programs, but also the emotional wisdom of balancing authority with compassion. Her new post in Washington, D.C. involved working directly with the U.S. Army's High Command to develop national policies for community engagement. It was a huge responsibility, but she felt prepared thanks to the lessons learned during both the tough and triumphant moments of her time in Fort Garrison. Richard remained at the base as Master Sergeant, continuing to lead the program that had become his most meaningful project in over 20 years of military service. Under his leadership, the initiative kept growing and improving, serving as a model for military bases across the country. 5 years after that rainy night when it all began, Jessica returned to Fort Garrison for a special ceremony. The program had been officially recognized by the Department of Defense as an example of excellence in military social responsibility. During the ceremony, she reunited with all the families she'd helped over the years. Michael, now a teenager, was in high school with a scholarship earned through one of the educational programs that stemmed from the original initiative. David had developed a special talent for math and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Emily, still young but already showing a strong personality, said she wanted to be a soldier who helps people when she grew up. Mrs. Diane, now the program's official community coordinator, gave a speech that captured the initiative's transformative impact. 5 years ago, my family was losing hope. Today, we're part of a strong, united community where people look out for one another. That happened because two good people decided that following rules and helping others didn't have to be separate things. During her visit, Jessica had the chance to work side by side with Richard again, now as his superior, a role reversal they both found amusing and meaningful. "Major Miller," Richard teased, using her new rank, "do you still remember when you were just a rebellious little private stealing bread from the mess hall?" "Master Sergeant Thompson," she replied in the same tone. "Do you still remember when you were a grumpy sergeant who didn't know what to do with problematic privates?" "Touché, Major, touché." The conversation turned more serious as they began planning the next phase of the program's expansion. "Jessica," Richard said, using her first name for the first time in years, "I want you to know that you didn't just change the lives of those families, you changed mine too. You taught me that real leadership isn't about controlling people but empowering them to do the right thing. Richard, you taught me that structure and discipline aren't enemies of compassion. They're the tools that make compassion effective and lasting." They worked together for a week, visiting communities, interviewing families who had benefited from the program, and training new coordinators. It was during these visits that Jessica realized the true extent of the impact her initial actions had set in motion. In one community, they encountered a situation that vividly reminded her of her early days helping Mrs. Diane. A young single mother was struggling to feed her two small children after losing her job. The difference was that now, instead of a desperate private stealing food, there was an official, efficient system ready to help. "It's amazing how things have changed," Jessica remarked to Richard as they watched local coordinators organize food distribution for the struggling family. "Things didn't change, Jessica. We changed. And because we changed, we were able to change the things around us." That distinction became central to the philosophy Jessica brought back to Washington, D.C. In her presentations to top military leadership, she always emphasized that effective social programs required not just resources and organization, but also personal transformation from those involved. "We can't teach compassion just through manuals and regulations," she said during a lecture to senior officers. "We have to live it, practice it, and model it through our own actions." The lecture became one of the most requested at military academies across the country. Jessica built a reputation as one of the most respected voices on the social role of the armed forces in contemporary American society. Her relationship with Richard evolved from rebellious subordinate and rigid superior to a professional partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. They stayed in regular contact, exchanging ideas about new developments and challenges in the program. 10 years after that fateful night in the food depot, Jessica had become a colonel, and Richard had been promoted to sergeant major. The Fort Garrison program had become an international model, with delegations from other countries visiting the base to learn about military community integration. During one such international visit, an officer from a foreign military asked Jessica a surprising question. "Colonel, how did you manage to balance military discipline with social flexibility? In most armies, those two things are seen as incompatible." "They're only incompatible if you think of them as opposites," Jessica replied. "True discipline includes the discipline to do the right thing, even when it's hard. And social flexibility requires the necessary structure to be sustainable long-term. And how did you discover that?" Jessica glanced at Richard, who was present at the meeting, and smiled before answering. "We learned through a mistake that turned into an opportunity. We learned that sometimes the best solutions come when we're forced to confront our own limitations and biases." After the meeting, Richard and Jessica walked through the same halls where it had all begun 10 years earlier. "Do you ever regret not kicking me out that first night?" Jessica asked, half joking. "Never. But sometimes I wonder where we'd be today if I had been less stubborn and more open to finding creative solutions from the start. Maybe we wouldn't have learned the lessons we needed to learn. Perhaps the program wouldn't have the strength it has today if we hadn't gone through all those hardships." "You might be right. Adversity has a way of teaching us lessons that easy success never could." That evening, they organized a special gathering with all the families originally helped by the program. It was a celebration not just of the successes achieved, but also of the relationships and personal transformations that had made it all possible. Michael, now a young college student studying engineering on a military scholarship, gave a speech representing all the families. 10 years ago, two people decided that following rules and helping others didn't have to be separate choices. Today, we are hundreds of families whose lives have been changed because they found a way to do both at the same time. This taught us that real change happens when good people work together, even when they start from different sides. Emily, now 14 and showing the same determination that had impressed Jessica years ago, approached her after the event. "Colonel Jessica, I still want to be a soldier when I grow up, but now I know what kind of soldier I want to be." "What kind, Emily?" "The kind who solves problems instead of creating them, the kind who finds ways to help even when it seems impossible. That's the best kind of soldier, my dear, and I'm sure you'll be excellent at it." When Jessica finally left Fort Garrison to return to Washington, D.C., she carried with her a new perspective on leadership, transformation, and social impact that would shape the rest of her military career. Years later, when she retired from the U.S. Army as a general, her final official project was writing a manual on military social programs that became required reading in military academies worldwide. The opening chapter of the manual told the story of a young soldier who broke rules for a just cause and a sergeant who chose education over punishment. The story ended with a reflection that summed up everything she had learned. True leadership isn't about having power over others, but about empowering others to find their own strength to do good. And true discipline isn't about blindly following rules, but about having the wisdom to know when rules serve their purpose and when they need to evolve to serve greater ones. Richard, who reviewed the manual before publication, added a final note that became one of the most famous quotes on compassionate military leadership. "A leader's greatest victory isn't winning a battle, but turning subordinates into leaders who are better than yourself. And a soldier's greatest victory isn't following orders perfectly, but knowing when to question imperfect orders in a way that improves the system for everyone." End of story. Now, tell me what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment below. Do you think Jessica and Richard made the right decisions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.